Welcome, everyone, to the December 20th, 2024 episode of On Iowa Politics. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, everyone. This week on the podcast, remembering Jim Leach, introducing Iowa's new lieutenant governor, Donald Trump sues the Des Moines Register, and let me brush this one off. I haven't done it in a while. Could it be Satan? All right, that's another one that it's a good test for the generational gap. I'm sure some people got that and some people have no idea what I'm doing. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. We come to you this week with a special introduction. Joining us on the podcast for the very first time is Marchel Hoff, the new Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Quad City Times and Lee newspaper. So welcome to the gang, Maya.
Hello, happy to be here.
All right, we're happy to have you.
Welcome to this endurance test.
All right, as we introduce the rest of the group this week, with just 4 shopping days left until Christmas, as we record here Friday morning, I'd like you all to tell me and our listeners what you will be getting me, your gracious podcast host, for Christmas this year. Maya's off the hook because she's brand new and doesn't yet know me well enough to get me that truly heartfelt gift. Plus, she already gave Tom and I an adorable little Christmas card. So Maya's already covered. But the rest of you better come through. So let's start with you, Tom. Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief Tom Barton is with us. What are you getting me?
$1 million.
All right, that's a good start.
Or a mini-me.
Ooh, I like it. All right, Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times is with us, looking festive as well. Sarah, what are you getting me?
I want a crisp high five.
Nothing wrong. There's never a bad time for a good high five. Jared McNett of the Sioux City Journal is with us. Jared?
Erin, best I can do for you is an NBA Cup, and it's all downhill for the rest of the season.
I feel like that's re-gifting almost, right? Like I already have an NBA Cup now.
Well, I'm just making you aware of it and really appreciating it.
Okay,
that's my gift. That's my gift.
Gotcha. All right, I'll take it. All right, finally is Santa Claus himself, Gazette columnist Todd Dorman.
Yes, I'm here.
What are you getting me, Todd?
Wisconsin Badger Independence Bowl sweatshirt. I'm sure they've been made somewhere. I can grab one before they ship them off to Africa or somewhere where they hand them out.
I appreciate you. You could have said a Rose Bowl merch from back in their multiple Rose Bowls, but you went for the Independence Bowl. I appreciate that, Todd.
I don't remember that they went to the Rose Bowl.
I'm sure. All right. First up this week, I wanted to give Todd a chance to talk about former Congressman Jim Leach, who passed away a little more than a week ago on December 11th. If you listened to us last week, you know that it happened just shortly before we recorded that episode. Todd wasn't able to join us last week, so I wanted to give him some time this week to talk about Leach, because I know Todd covered the congressman back when Todd was one of us measly grunt reporters. In Todd's column this week, which I very much recommend you check out if you haven't already, Todd said Leach, quote, personified political decency. Beyond that, Todd, how will you remember Jim Leach, and do you have any favorite Jim Leach memories or stories?
Not sure I have any stories. I guess I'll have a story. I can sit around with my grandkids and say, grandkids, you'll never guess what there used to be, a moderate Republican. And they'll be like, no, they didn't exist, Grandpa. You're losing it. So yeah, he was moderate from the beginning. He was kind of just, he was seen as liberal on social issues, fiscally conservative. There used to be quite a few of those kind of Republicans in Congress, and now they're nearly extinct. I don't know if they're getting federal protection or anything, but they should. They're, monarch butterflies and moderate Republicans. And he stuck with that. He always considered himself a Republican, but was never willing to sort of, be a political weather vane and sort of change with the party. I think we've seen Chuck Grassley and others have been a lot more malleable to wherever the political wind is blowing at any particular moment, whereas Leach sort of was, it was sort of his foundation was in his sort of this core idea that cooperation and collaboration and bipartisanship could result in good things for the American people. And it wasn't that, that he wasn't throwing around the word civility. It just a sort of, oh, do it my way and it'll be civil. I mean, he understood that there had to be disagreements, but I think he looked around the landscape, especially after Donald Trump was elected, and decided that he really couldn't be a Republican anymore. There wasn't anywhere for him. There was no space for him in the party. So, and really after Congress was kind of the more interesting part of his career. He chaired the National Humanities Council, and he taught at 3 universities. And, I think he was just someone he went on a civility tour, all 50 states. He was a fascinating guy, hell of a wrestler, I guess. Won a state title in Iowa. That's pretty good. So, and he's in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, which I think is in like Stillwater, Oklahoma, or someplace like that. So he was a high quality public servant. He stuck to his beliefs, and we're not going to see many like him again, and he's going to be missed.
Sarah, Todd mentioned Jim Leach's high school state championship in wrestling. He grew up in Davenport and accomplished that feat there. So obviously, as a Davenport native, I'm guessing that a lot of folks remember the former congressman in the Quad Cities there. What have there been any memories and tributes coming in that stand out to you?
Yeah, so like you said, he grew up at Davenport, graduated from what was then Davenport High School, state champion wrestler, 1960, and his family was pretty big in Davenport. Actually, there's a riverfront park named after his dad, who donated some land, Leach Park, it's actually in Bettendorf. And so he lived in Davenport until 2001, when redistricting drew him out of the district and he moved to Iowa City. He lived in McClellan Heights, next door to the house where he grew up, which I thought was interesting. He kind of just stayed like a hometown guy until 2001, when he moved into a new district to continue serving in Congress. And when I say new district, I mean moved into where the lines had been drawn. So I talked with a couple of his longtime friends and staffers, and they really just had, obviously glowing things to say about him. That he's humble, very smart, all around great guy. Ed Winborn, he was a Davenport mayor and longtime county supervisor who got into politics because Jim Leach suggested he should. Um, and I talked to one of his campaign managers who just said that while he was in Congress, one example of his kind of moral fiber that she talked about, he would not accept any money from political action committees and didn't take more than $500 from an individual during his campaign, which she said, as his campaign manager for several years, was really difficult to compete sometimes, because other people were taking that money. So yeah, she said he wouldn't give an inch on that. Yeah, there are a lot of people that I think will remember Jim Leach as, like Todd said, somebody who embraced civility and moderate politics.
Excellent. And just one last public service reminder on this. If you didn't listen to last episode, I will remind you that if you are fortunate enough to know former Gazette reporter Rod Boshart, ask him to share his Jim Leach story. It's incredible. All right. In what has to be one of the most jarring segues ever here, we're going to move now from a man who was, quote unquote, personified political decency to the literal devil. This past week at the Iowa Capitol, Satan's presence has been Satan's present. Merry Christmas. Satan's presence has been felt. The Satanic Temple planned to hold a ceremony in the Capitol Rotunda this past weekend, just like it did a year ago. Folks may remember that because the group's display was vandalized, a man was charged, presidential candidates like Ron DeSantis got involved, operating to help the man with his legal issues. Anyway, this time the state rejected the Satanic Temple's request to put up its display and conduct a ceremony in the Capitol Rotunda. And now the group is back with another request. I'm going to step aside here. Maya, you had quite the introduction to Iowa in politics and government when this became one of the first stories you reported in this new gig. So tell us all about it.
Yeah, I don't know what type of note it's setting with my first few stories being about the Satanic Temple. I feel like that's just up to interpretation. But in the spirit of the holidays, right, like you said, this display came to the Nebraska. I'm so sorry. I just came
Oh,
from
old
Nebraska.
habits. Nice.
Whew. The Iowa Capitol, it came to the Iowa Capitol last year under this rule that allows religious displays and celebrations in the Capitol complex during the holiday season. And they were able to do it last year, even though their display was kind of destroyed by a man who drove up from Mississippi and beheaded a statue. But this year, a couple days before they were scheduled to have their display last Saturday, they were informed that their request had been denied because their display was, quote unquote, quoting the Department of Administrative Services, would be harmful to minors. So, when any group is wanting to have a display or a celebration or an event in the Capitol complex, they have to agree to the rules set by the Memorandum of Understanding. And one of those is making sure that it isn't obscene or harmful to minors. And so that's kind of what the department pointed to as their reason for canceling their display. And kind of further going into that, they were questioning why it would be harmful. And when the temple was going back and forth with the staff there, they were discussing what the costumes would look like for a Krampus costume contest, what the ornaments would look like for an ornament decorating activity, what the carols would be sung, what the ritual would look like for, what they would do for the ritual. And so they provided a picture of this group picture of these folks dressed up in Krampus costumes. If you don't know, it's this kind of furry beast with horns. I don't wanna go into the context because that's not my area of expertise on that, and I don't wanna step on any toes, but basically, they were holding sticks, and the office came back and was like, "Those sticks could be seen as a harm to children." And so that's kind of where they're at. And so after the display was canceled, their general counsel came back and requested that they bring the display back this Saturday. Still don't know if that's going to be allowed or not. They haven't responded, but if not, they're looking at taking legal action because it would be considered to the general counsel for the Satanic Temple, the National Satanic Temple. That's who they're having represent them.
Right.
But they're looking at potential legal action because of violation of First Amendment rights. And they're arguing that the denial was content based and wouldn't fall under the obscenity rule in the Memorandum of Understanding.
Yeah. So, and as we record here Friday morning, right, Maya, we don't know. I think you alluded there. We haven't heard whether it's going to be approved or what's going to happen next. So we probably have an update next week, but we're kind of waiting to see what happens there.
It's interesting the framing it around obscenity, because at least when it comes to First Amendment stuff, obscenity has a really specific definition that tends to be more about like kind of prurient interest or like sexual conduct in a way that's like offensive. So it's interesting to me to be framing it around obscenity. And then the what was the supposed harm to children? Did they break that down more in the kind of original like statement that got put out, Maya?
No, they didn't really specify what the specific harm to children would be. The reason why we knew they were kind of pointing to the sticks in the example photo is from a letter that was sent from the general counsel to them, and then he sent it to me. And so he refers to them coming back and saying, "Hey, we see the sticks in the reference photo you sent." That would be harmful to children. But the other types of harm that they're looking at, they haven't really described that or expanded on that at all. So, but like you said, obscenity, it's usually focused around sexually explicit things, right? But in the obscenity definition in the memorandum of understanding, part of it bans obscene materials, including ones that would depict violence or gore. So maybe that's kind of what they're pointing to more. But when you think of obscenity, the traditional thing is mainly sexually explicit content. So,
Yeah, and then there has to be like a lack of any like political value, among other things, which obviously something like this is explicitly a political action. It's kind of hard to argue that it's not.
I know there's going to be one lawmaker in particular who's not going to comment on this, and it's probably State Representative John Dunwell. Dunwell, yeah, from Newton. Last year when he's a lawyer, and last year when this cropped up, he wrote an essay basically saying why it's important to respect freedom of expression and other viewpoints, and he just got annihilated on social media for being, pro Satan, I guess. So I don't expect a lot of people to step up and speak for the goat-headed deity at this time.
I was going to ask if anybody, because you're trying to describe this as best you can, we have in our coverage that has been posted on the Gazette and Lee websites. We have file photos from last year's display because that did make it up, and as we talked about, then was later vandalized. Is it your understanding that it was going to be pretty similar to that? If not, like how close do you know? And the reason I asked is like, can I point people to say, if you're curious what this thing looks like, go look at our website and see last year's, or do you think it was going to be different than that one?
yeah, from what the general counsel explained, it was going to be very similar. There were
Okay.
going to be poinsettias, an inverted pentagram, and it was actually going to include the head of the statue that was destroyed last year.
Okay.
So
And
it
we have
wasn't.
photos pre-decapitation. So yeah. So if you're curious about that, you can find our Maya's stories in either the Gazette or any of the Lee websites, and you'll see a photo from last year as an example. All right. It's always something interesting going on at the Iowa Capitol. Thanks for that, Maya. And again, welcome. You're officially a member now. I dubbed thee an on Iowa Politics podcaster.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. Staying in the Iowa Capitol. In fact, just off the rotunda, literally a few feet from where this would have happened, in the governor's formal office this past week, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds announced her new lieutenant governor. After months of speculation and one particularly ill-sourced report on prospective candidates from a Gazette bureau chief who will not be named here, Reynolds selected State Senator Chris Cournoyer of LeClaire in Scott County. Sarah, the new Lieutenant Governor Cournoyer, is from your neck of the woods, so tell us a little about the state's new second in command.
Chris Cournoyer, she represents Iowa Senate District 35, which covers a couple of the Mississippi River counties over here. So she's from LeClaire. Her district covers parts of Scott County, Clinton County, and slices of southwestern Jackson County. And so she was elected in 2018 and reelected in 2022. She previously was a school board member on the Pleasant Valley School Board. She's worked as a website designer, as a substitute teacher, and a reserve deputy for the Scott County Sheriff's Department. In the Senate, she's served as the Senate Technology Committee chair and the vice chair of the State Government Committee, and she's also been involved in education legislation, given her experience on the school board. I thought it was interesting in your story, Erin, that she talks about having first met Reynolds when she was a lieutenant governor, and Reynolds was speaking at an event in Davenport to encourage girls to engage in STEM classes and programs. I think that's something that really intersects with her experience prior to becoming a senator. Yeah, so she's Senator Conoyer, now Lieutenant Governor Conoyer. She supported Reynolds' priorities on tax cuts, education savings accounts, restrictions on content in schools, the changes to the area education agencies that we saw this past year. And she's specifically worked on legislation dealing with consumer data privacy and digital stalking, cybersecurity. Um, and in the run up to the 2024 Republican presidential caucuses, she endorsed former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley and spoke at a lot of different events with Nikki Haley around, especially in this area. So that is a little bit about Chris Conoyer.
Yeah, and some people have been talking about Conoyer endorsed Haley and Governor Reynolds endorsed Ron DeSantis, of course. So interesting kind of marriage of caucus politics there for whatever that's worth. All right, Jared, first of all, humblest apologies that my misguided story also created extra work for you that also didn't pay off in a Western Iowa selection. And feel free to pass along my apologies to Chris McGowan too, although or maybe he was fine with being just honored to be nominated, maybe.
Happy to be thought of.
Yeah, exactly. Jared, what is there anything that we should read into Governor Reynolds' selection here of Chris Conoyer? Should we try to parse anything out of this?
I don't know that you necessarily need to do too much reading of tea leaves or anything. What it did have me doing, though, is kind of going back through sort of the ranks of things and seeing how well kind of Northwest Iowa is represented. So of the major committees in the Senate, only 3 of those, education, ethics, and judiciary, are being chaired by folks from Northwest Iowa. And then in the House, it's 3 major committees as well: judiciary, local government, and education, which is Skylar Wheeler again. So there is representation, but I don't know if it's exactly to the level that you might just automatically assume, given how red Northwest Iowa is.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that's a good point. And given that the previous lieutenant governor, Adam Gregg, was from Northwest
Yes.
Iowa originally, and I always fumble over the town name. I can
Haywarden.
thank you. I always
Yep.
I manage to mispronounce that every time. So there you go. Interesting. All right. Finally, this week, man, we had a loaded week for the podcast. We're rolling into the holidays with a newsworthy episode here. President-elect Donald Trump sued the Des Moines Register and pollster Ann Seltzer over the final 2024 pre-election Iowa poll, claiming consumer fraud. Tom, you wrote a few stories about that this week. Tell us a little bit more about this lawsuit. In particular, I know, and first of all, everyone should read Tom's story, but I know you talked to some legal experts who offered their perspective on the lawsuit, and I'd be curious to hear you share a little bit what they said too.
Yeah, so Trump's lawyers argue that the poll was manipulated to create a false narrative favoring Kamala Harris, which they say deceived both voters and campaign strategists. Legal experts suggest that Trump's claims are unlikely to succeed, as consumer fraud laws typically don't apply to news content, and that publishing incorrect information is protected under the First Amendment. But more broadly, these ongoing legal challenges against media outlets by Trump raise concerns about potential chilling effects, where news outlets become more hesitant to report stories critical of Trump and his administration to avoid potential legal action. And First Amendment activists and experts worry that that will limit accountability for public figures. So just to refresh everyone's memory, the Des Moines Register put out their Iowa poll 3 days before the November 5th general election that showed Vice President Harris leading Trump by 3 percentage points in the Republican-led state. Trump ultimately won Iowa by more than 13 percentage points. And so The lawsuit says that it seeks accountability for what it calls brazen election interference committed by the defendants in favor of Harris. It's worth noting that the pollster Ann Selzer has, repeatedly said that she has seen nothing in the polling data that would have signaled that the results were off. And the Des Moines Register, in a statement, said that both the newspaper and Selzer have acknowledged that the pre-election poll did not reflect the ultimate margin of victory, and have released the poll's full demographics, crosstabs, and data, as well as a technical explanation from Ann Selzer. And the newspaper examined the poll's methods and respondent sample for clues about why its results differed so widely from the actual vote. The statement from the Register went on to say that it stands by its reporting on the matter and believes that the lawsuit is without merit. Pundits and pollsters, largely reacted with shock and surprise to the polling, which grabbed national and international headlines. Democrats seized on the poll to highlight excitement and enthusiasm among Iowa voters since Harris accepted the presidential nomination after President Biden bowed out of the race. Republicans called it a clear outlier and noted that other mainstream Iowa polls showed Trump comfortably ahead in Iowa. So Trump's lawyers are claiming that the 16 or 17 point deviation from election day results was, not a simple miss, but rather, again, what they claim to be is an attempt to influence the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. They accuse Ann Selzer and the Register of acting with quote unquote corrupt intent, and again, manipulating the data to create a false narrative of inevitability for Harris in the final week of the 2024 presidential election, and to increase enthusiasm among Democrats, compel Republicans to divert campaign resources to areas which they were ahead. And, what they claim is to deceive the public into believing that Democratic candidates were performing better than they really are. All of these, I guess, claims are being made under Iowa's Consumer Fraud Act, which prohibits deceptive advertising. So Trump's legal team is arguing that the poll was deceptive and misleading, that it was unfair and the result of concealment, suppression, and omission of material facts about the true respective positions of Trump and Harris in Iowa, all of which they argue were known to the defendants or should have been disclosed to the public. It's worth noting, though, that the lawsuit hasn't provided any evidence that Ann Selzer and the Des Moines Register did anything improper in reporting the polling results. There's no information or evidence presented, to kind of back up their claims that they intentionally manipulated the polling data, or that this was, some, I guess, indicative of collusion, between the polling firm, the Register, and Democratic campaigns or candidates. Trump and his lawyers are seeking unspecified damages, and they're also asking that the court enjoin the Register and its parent company, Gazette, from publishing or releasing any further deceptive polls, and requiring that they disclose all data information upon which they relied in creating and releasing the poll. So I spoke to two University of Iowa law professors, one of whom is a legal historian with a focus on journalism, privacy, defamation, and the First Amendment. And then another one who teaches tort and constitutional law with an emphasis on defamation and speech injuries. What's interesting in this case is, again, Trump and his legal team, it's not a defamation suit, right? We've seen other legal action taken by President-elect Trump against media organizations but they've alleged defamation, right? That they've defamed his character, reputation. This suit is somewhat novel in that they're not alleging defamation. Instead, they're alleging that the Register and the polling firm committed consumer fraud, which according to the legal experts that I talked to, these University of Iowa law professors said is extremely far-fetched. That consumer fraud laws typically do not apply to news content, but rather to protect consumers of goods and services from false advertising. And again, just said that this legal argument that news coverage meets the definition of merchandise under Iowa law is just what they told me was, quote, just an incredibly awkward fit. They went on to say that Trump's claims are creative, but ultimately meritless, again, emphasizing that publishing information that turns out to be, incorrect or different from the election results, is protected by the First Amendment and does not constitute fraud, especially, again, as we said, the Register published its polling methodology. It published the crosstabs, it published the information about, who they surveyed and, how they came to the results that they did, albeit we don't really have a definitive or concrete answer to the question as to why their polling results, were so off base and why it just missed the mark so badly. But it's hard to think that you can allege fraud when, they've been upfront about how they conducted this poll, who they surveyed, how they did the surveying, how they gathered that information.
Another issue I know that people have pointed out is what exactly are the damages to point to, considering that Trump won the state by such a wide margin? So
right, they are seeking damages. They haven't specified, the amount of damages they're asking for or looking for. They haven't said, here's kind of our estimate as to what we think the damages are. But they did claim that Trump, his campaign, and other Republicans were forced to divert what they say were enormous campaign and financial resources to Iowa because of the polling. It also alleges that Iowa consumers who paid for subscriptions to the Des Moines Register or otherwise purchased the publication were also badly deceived, along with Iowans who contributed to Trump's campaign. And the suit and the University of Iowa law professors, dispute this and argue, whether they can actually claim this. But it argues that Trump is a consumer, and they said it's hard to believe that you could claim that Trump was an Iowa consumer, who would fall under the Iowa consumer fraud statute. I guess unless you can prove that he purchased a copy of the Des Moines Register and has a subscription to,
I was just gonna say, news. Good
yeah.
for him.
I was just gonna say I'd love to see that come out in Discovery that
Right.
he has a receipt for the November 4th edition of the Des Moines Register.
Yeah. And then just quickly to wrap this up, but the why this matters, kind of the bigger picture here is, even if the case gets dismissed or Trump loses, these University of Iowa law professors worry that these frivolous lawsuits could lead to a chilling effect, as I mentioned, where news outlets, even if they ultimately prevail, the cost of having to defend a lawsuit and the interruption that brings to a news organization is tremendous. And they may make, especially smaller news outlets, who lack the resources of a Des Moines Register that's part of a much larger, bigger national newspaper chain, will be skittish about how they cover this administration and how they cover the incoming president, and maybe more gun shy about critical coverage of Trump and his administration. One of the law professors said that she predicts a escalating legal war on the press by Trump and his allies, which again could, what she said, could be the beginning of a very long battle involving the press and freedom of the press going forward. The incoming president has vowed to continue suing news outlets and social media influencers for defamation, saying, while it costs a lot of money to do it, Trump said that he believes that we have to straighten out the press. And PEN America, which is a literacy nonprofit that advocates for the protection of free expression in the United States, argues that this what they see as a pattern of constant weaponized lawsuits, that it's not about correcting inaccuracies, but they fear about intimidating journalists into silence and shielding government leaders from accountability.
I mean, there's still a $10 billion lawsuit out there that Trump has against CBS for the 60 Minutes piece on Harris. So this is not even the only ongoing lawsuit right now that he has with the media.
And ABC recently settled with them over a separate case on terminology that they used in their reporting, right?
Yep.
Right.
And it's worth noting too that it's not just Trump, because last year in like October, Clarence Thomas kind of renewed a call for reconsidering Sullivan, or New York Times versus Sullivan, which for any First Amendment heads is kind of the foundational case for restricting the ability of public officials to sue for defamation. So it's not just a thing that's coming from Trump on something like this. Yeah,
that's a good point. All right. Well, I'm regretting the way I structured this script, because that's kind of for us journalists, that's kind of a bummer of a topic to land on and go into Christmas. So, it occurs to me, let me say this. We do this every week here and love doing it and taking some time out of our Thursday afternoons each week, or every once in a while Friday morning, and summarizing the work we've done and the big issues of the week. So we want to thank all of you who have tuned in to us this past year and all previous years and in all future years as well. So to all of you listeners, as we wrap up 2024 here, let me just say on behalf of all of us that we thank you very much for being part of our little podcast family here. That's going to do it for this episode of On Iowa Politics. Obviously, as I just alluded to, you're not going to hear from us for a couple of weeks. We're going to take a break for the holidays. We'll be back in your earbuds and car radios on Friday, January 10th, when we'll preview the 2025 legislative session. The work on that has already begun. We'll be ready to go by then. Please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or on YouTube, where you should also smash that like button. You can also find the podcast each and every week on your preferred Gazette or Lee newspaper website. And now that you've listened to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you're also subscribed to the On Iowa Politics newsletter. I could read that to you too if you want to listen to it. Just let me know. Every morning in your inbox, you'll receive all the latest politics and government coverage from our team. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. And lastly, don't forget that the work of everyone you heard here today can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mason City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. For our full and now newly extended gang, for Tom Barton, Maya Marchel, Hoff, Sarah Watson, Jared McNett, Todd Dorman, and our producer, Bailey Chehan, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone. Be good. And again, everyone here on our team wishes you and your teams a happy and healthy holidays.